He said he needed to focus on himself. Then suddenly he was in love with another girl. I genuinely don't understand how some men can completely destroy a woman emotionally and then immediately move on into another relationship acting happier than ever while the girl they left behind is still sitting alone, trying to figure out what went wrong. Because that's exactly what happened to me, and honestly, I still feel sick every time I think about it. For 2 years, I gave this man everything I possibly could emotionally, mentally, and physically, and I stayed through every confusing phase, every moment where he became distant, every excuse about stress, life problems, and not being ready for commitment. Because I truly believed love meant being patient with someone you care about, even when things become difficult. I was the girl who stayed up late listening to his problems when nobody else cared, the girl who reassured him whenever he doubted himself, the girl who made time for him no matter how exhausted I was, and the girl who defended him even when my friends warned me that something about him felt emotionally unavailable, because I kept convincing myself that if I loved him hard enough, eventually he would stop being afraid and finally choose me completely. But instead of choosing me, he slowly started becoming colder, more distant, replying less, disappearing for hours and making me feel guilty for asking the bare minimum. Yet every single time I tried to walk away, he would pull me back with just enough affection to keep me emotionally attached. Then one day he hit me with the exact same line men always seem to use when they're already halfway out the door, telling me he needed to focus on himself and that he wasn't mentally ready for a relationship right now. And because I loved him, I respected it even though it shattered me inside. But not even 2 weeks later, I found out he was already in a new relationship with another girl, posting her proudly, giving her the consistency I begged for, and suddenly becoming the committed boyfriend he swore he couldn't be for me. And I cannot even describe how humiliating that felt, because it made me question whether anything we had was ever real at all. The worst part about heartbreak, like this is how people expect the girl to quietly accept it and move on as if being emotionally discarded by someone you love deeply is something that only hurts for a few days, because nobody understands what it does to your self-worth when a man spends years making you feel special only to suddenly erase you from his life like you were temporary the entire time. Some nights I still stare at my phone hoping he'll text me explaining everything, even though deep down I already know he probably never will. And that silence honestly hurts more than the breakup itself, because at least an honest goodbye would have meant I mattered enough for closure. Instead, I got ghosted, removed, replaced, and left alone with questions that replay in my head every single day, wondering why I was never enough for the version of him another girl gets so easily now, because suddenly he's capable of consistency, communication, affection, effort, and commitment, all the things he acted like were impossible during our relationship. And it makes me feel physically sick realizing he had the ability all along, but simply didn't love me enough to give it willingly. I think what hurts the most is realizing how much of myself I lost trying to keep him happy, because somewhere during those 2 years, I slowly became the kind of girl who constantly overthought every little thing, analyzing reply times, rereading conversations, wondering if I sounded annoying for expressing emotions, and blaming myself every time he became distant instead of questioning why someone who claimed to care about me kept making me feel so unwanted. I changed pieces of myself hoping it would make him stay longer, becoming more understanding, less emotional, less needy, less expressive, because I was terrified of being too much for someone who was already giving me so little. And now looking back at it, I hate realizing how comfortable he became accepting my love while giving almost nothing in return except empty promises and temporary reassurance whenever he felt me pulling away. Seeing him happy with another girl genuinely broke something inside me, because it confirmed my biggest fear, that maybe he was always capable of loving correctly, just not with me. I remember crying over things I should have never had to beg for in the first place. Basic communication, reassurance, consistency, honesty. While this new girl seems to receive all of it naturally without even asking, and it creates this unbearable comparison in my head where I keep wondering what she has that I didn't. Was she prettier? Less emotional? More interesting? Easier to love? Because when a woman gets replaced quickly after giving someone her entire heart, it becomes impossible not to compare herself to the girl who came after her, especially when the man who hurt her suddenly transforms into the exact boyfriend she spent years hoping he would become. What nobody talks about enough is how humiliating heartbreak feels for girls who genuinely loved sincerely, because it's embarrassing realizing you were crying over someone who is probably already emotionally investing in another woman while still telling you he cared about you. Sometimes I look back at old messages and feel stupid for missing signs that seem painfully obvious now, because there were moments where I could literally feel him emotionally slipping away, yet I kept holding on tighter, hoping love would somehow fix it. But love cannot force someone to value you, and that realization has honestly been one of the hardest things for me to accept, because I kept thinking if I stayed loyal enough, patient enough, and understanding enough, eventually, he would recognize my worth. But instead, he left me emotionally exhausted, while someone else benefits from all the healing I helped him through. I hate how heartbreak changes the way a girl sees herself, because before him I used to be confident, expressive, affectionate, and hopeful about love. But after being abandoned so coldly, I started questioning everything about myself, wondering if maybe I'm too easy to leave, too available, too emotional, or simply not memorable enough for someone to fight for. Now every compliment feels hard to believe, because the one person I wanted reassurance from made me feel replaceable without even trying. And sometimes I catch myself thinking that maybe I was only loved for convenience, only loved when I was emotionally useful, because the second he found excitement somewhere else, it suddenly became so easy for him to disappear from my life completely. The hardest nights are the quiet ones where I'm alone with my thoughts, because that's when every memory starts replaying in my head like a movie. I cannot pause. The late night calls, the inside jokes, the promises about the future, the moments where he held me and made me feel safe. Because now all of those memories feel poisoned, knowing he could walk away from me so easily afterward. And honestly, the most painful realization is understanding that I would have never intentionally hurt him the way he hurt me. Because when I love someone, I protect their feelings carefully. But somehow the person I loved most had no problem becoming the source of my deepest insecurities and emotional pain. Sometimes I wonder if men like him even understand the emotional damage they leave behind when they disappear without closure. Because while they move forward into new relationships, excited for a fresh start, the girl they abandoned is left trying to rebuild her confidence from the ground up after being made to feel disposable. He probably doesn't realize that I now overthink every interaction with new people, that I panic whenever someone becomes distant, or that I constantly fear being replaced again because once a woman experiences being discarded by someone she trusted deeply, part of her starts expecting abandonment everywhere. What scares me most now is how guarded I've become, because despite how deeply I crave love, I'm terrified of giving my heart to another man, only to experience this exact pain all over again. I miss the version of myself that believed love was safe, the girl who could trust without fear, because now I question everything and everyone. And I hate that someone else's inability to love me correctly turned me into someone who struggles to believe affection is genuine anymore. But even through all this pain, part of me knows I deserve better than being someone's temporary comfort, while they searched for the person they actually wanted to commit to, because no girl deserves to spend years proving her worth to a man who was already planning to leave emotionally long before he physically walked away. And maybe that's the hardest truth I'm slowly learning to accept. Sometimes the reason a man moves on so quickly isn't because the girl he left behind meant nothing, but because some people avoid guilt by distracting themselves with somebody new before they ever have to sit alone with the damage they caused, while the girl they hurt is forced to process every emotion, honestly and painfully by herself. I still have days where I cry wondering why I wasn't enough for him, days where seeing happy couples online makes my chest ache, and days where I replay everything searching for answers I may never receive. But little by little, I'm starting to realize that being abandoned by someone incapable of loving me properly does not make me unlovable, because one day, I want to believe there will be someone who chooses me fully without confusion, inconsistency, or excuses. Someone who won't make me beg for the bare minimum while giving another girl everything I spent years asking for. And until then, I'm trying to learn how to stop blaming myself for the way someone else failed to value my heart. Some days the anger finally hits harder than the sadness. And honestly, I think that's because I'm starting to realize just how unfair everything was from the very beginning. Because while I spent 2 years loving him carefully and trying not to lose him, he had the luxury of keeping me emotionally attached without ever fully committing to me the way I deserved. He got all the benefits of being loved unconditionally without having to give me real security in return. And somehow I convinced myself that accepting breadcrumbs was proof of loyalty instead of proof that I was settling for less than I needed emotionally. Now, when I look back, I can see how many times I ignored my own intuition just because I was scared of losing him. Because deep down there were moments where I knew something felt wrong, moments where his energy changed, where his effort disappeared, where his words stopped matching his actions. But every time I questioned it, he would reassure me just enough to keep me holding on. And I hate admitting how badly I wanted his love to be real because it made me tolerate things that slowly destroyed my confidence piece by piece. The thing about being the girl who truly loves sincerely is that after the relationship ends, you don't just grieve the person. You grieve the future you built around them inside your head. I imagined birthdays together, trips together, growing older together, and even stupid little things like random late-night drives or grocery shopping together one day. And now all those imagined memories feel empty because the person I pictured beside me chose someone else instead. And meanwhile, he probably has no idea how painful it is, carrying memories that still feel alive to me while he's already emotionally moved on. Because for him, maybe it was easy to detach slowly over time while staying with me, physically. But for me, the loss happened all at once the second I realized the person I loved was never coming back emotionally. That's why it feels so impossible to heal sometimes. Because while he had time to prepare for the ending, I was still fighting for us until the very last second. I also think people underestimate how deeply ghosting affects a girl emotionally, because when someone disappears without properly explaining anything, your brain starts creating its own explanations instead. And most of the time, those explanations turn into self-hatred. Suddenly, every insecurity becomes louder, every flaw feels bigger, and every memory becomes evidence that maybe you were never enough in the first place. There are moments where I genuinely wonder if he even misses me at all, or if I've already become nothing more than a forgotten chapter in his life while he continues building new memories with someone else. And honestly, that thought hurts more than I can explain, because how do you go from talking to someone every single day for 2 years to acting like they never mattered? I can't even comprehend being that emotionally detached from someone I once loved deeply, which makes me question whether he ever loved me the same way I loved him at all. The saddest part is that despite everything he put me through, a small part of me still misses him sometimes. And I hate admitting that, because after all the pain, confusion, and abandonment, I wish my heart would stop caring about someone who moved on so easily without me. But healing isn't linear, and some nights loneliness makes me miss not just him, but the comfort of having someone to talk to. Someone whose presence became part of my routine for so long that now the silence feels unbearable. I miss who I thought he was before everything fell apart, before the ghosting, before the replacement, before he made me feel disposable. Because the version of him I loved would never have intentionally destroyed me this way. Yet the reality is that the man I loved and the man who left me so coldly are somehow the same person. And accepting that contradiction has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do emotionally. But maybe the biggest lesson I'm slowly learning through all of this pain is that being loved inconsistently can damage a girl more than being alone ever could. Because when someone keeps giving and taking away affection unpredictably, it teaches you to survive on crumbs while convincing yourself it's enough. And eventually you become so focused on earning love that you forget real love is not supposed to feel like emotional starvation. I'm still healing, still trying to rebuild the parts of myself that his absence shattered. And honestly, I still have days where I cry over everything that happened. But deep down, I know I cannot keep measuring my worth based on a man who failed to recognize it while he had me. One day I want to love without fear again. And one day I want to meet someone who doesn't make me question whether I'm enough every single day. Someone who chooses me clearly, consistently, and proudly instead of making me feel like I'm always competing for basic love and commitment. Because no girl deserves to feel like she was only a temporary placeholder in someone else's story, when all she ever wanted was to finally be chosen completely.